The Supreme Court says House Republicans waited too long to file a lawsuit alleging the redrawn district maps gives Democrats an unfair advantage.
WIFR News reporter Anthony Ferretti talks with the Senate Republican and House Democrat about if the 2021 updated maps give voters a voice.
Wednesday's decision comes after Minority Leader Tony McCombie and other House Republicans took legal action in January 2025, arguing the legislative maps are gerrymandered in favor of Democrats.
Illinois is the poster child for gerrymandering.
State Senator Dave Severson says he is frustrated with the Supreme Court's ruling to not hear the case about the current legislative maps. Severson says the state is supposed to equally divide the districts, but what the court is doing is unconstitutional.
Voters should be deciding who represents them, not politicians.
Currently, Democrats control the state House, Senate, and U.S. House by a wide margin. 5 of the 7 justices on the state Supreme Court are also Democrats. Severson argues districts should be drawn by voters in a nonpartisan way.
The only reason they do that is to help protect themselves so they can win.
They supported a previous resolution to take this power away from politicians, but nothing came from it.
When the voters are taken out of the scenario, you end up with a government that's not responsible.
Democratic State Representative Dave Vella disagrees because House Republicans should have taken legal action sooner.
The people who are in their districts care about their districts, and that's why they're there.
Vella says he understands Republicans are in the minority and respects them for using the legal system in the right way.
It's great to be in a country, and especially in a state, where they have the right to do this. They can still avail themselves of all the different mechanisms inside the government, and that's what makes it a great country. And that's why I love the legal system.
Leader McCombie released a statement concerning her lawsuit Wednesday, saying the Illinois Supreme Court is doing the Democrats dirty work with what she calls a raw, cynical power grab.
Thank you, Anthony. And a 2024 World Population Review study says Illinois doesn't even crack the top 10 for worst gerrymandered states. 9 of the 10 worst, according to the study, favor Republicans. The lone exception is Maryland, which gives the most unfair advantage in the country to Democrats.